In this section of the video, you will learn about demand. The law of demand states that the quantity of a well-defined good that people are willing and able to purchase during a given period of time decreases as the price increases, everything else being constant. Let's look a minute at some of the assumptions of the law of demand. Let's look at some details about the law of demand. First, the law of demand emphasizes that we are dealing with a standardized or homogeneous product. This part of the law means that consumers are wanting a good whose characteristics do not differ from producer to producer. Fresh vegetables, fruit, meat, and milk are examples of a standardized or homogeneous product because the quality and taste don't differ too radically from producer to producer. Second, individuals must want the good. If individuals don't want the good, then they cannot demand it. For example, if an individual doesn't like cabbage, then he or she will not demand it because they don't like to eat cabbage. Third, the individual must be able to purchase the good. If an individual wants $1 million home but does not have the ability to pay for $1 million home, then they are not counted as part of the demand for $1 million homes. Third, all other variables are assumed to be held constant. The variables that are held constant are income, prices of related goods, tastes and preferences of the consumers, the expectations about the future, number of buyers, the exchange rate. There are two key concepts related to demand. First, demand is the amount of good that an individual is willing and able to purchase at every possible price during a given time period. And the quantity demanded is the amount of a good that an individual is willing and able to purchase at a particular price. Let's take a look at demand in the terms of a demand schedule. A demand schedule is a table of all the different combinations of prices and quantities of a good associated with each other. Let's look at an example of this by considering an example of a consumer of meat. Our individual has $25 per month to spend on meat. Notice that she meets the criteria set down in the definition of demand. She is both willing to buy the meat and has the necessary money to do so. The first step is to construct a table similar to the one on the slide. The first column is labeled with the price of the meat per pound, and the second column is the quantity of meat in per pounds that the individual demands at a particular price. If the price of meat is $5 per pound, then the individual is able to purchase 5 pounds, or $25 divided by $5 per pound. If the price per meat drops to $4 a pound, then the quantity of meat the person can purchase is 6 1/4 pounds, or 6.25 pounds. That is $25 divided by $4 per pound. If the price is $3 per pound, then the individual is able to purchase 8 1/3 pounds, or 8.33 pounds, 25 divided by $3. If the price per pound is $2, then the individual is able to purchase 12 1/2 pounds, or 12.5 pounds, $25 divided by $2. If the price per pound is $1, then the individual is able to purchase 25 pounds, that is $25 divided by 1. Notice as the price decreases, the amount of the good demanded increases. Economists have a fancy way of describing this type of relationship. They refer to it as an inverse relationship or a negative relationship. The terms inverse relationship or negative relationship means that as one variable, in this case price, decreases, the other variable increases, in this case the quantity of meat. Another thing to understand is that each set of price and quantity is called the quantity demanded. If an economist would be looking at the second row from the top of the table, the one highlighted, he would say at the price of $4 the quantity demanded is 6 1/4 pounds of meat. We can take the table in the previous slide and convert it into a graph. A graph of a demand schedule contains a demand curve. A demand curve is found by graphing the prices of goods with its corresponding quantities. Let's take a look at a demand curve. Demand curves always have the same layout. The x-axis, the horizontal axis or the back and forth axis, always represents the quantity of good. It is important to remember that as you move from left to right, the quantity increases. The y-axis, the vertical axis or the up and down axis, always represents the price of a good. It is important to remember that as you move from the bottom upward, the price increases. The next step is to graph the combinations of prices and quantities from the table. If the price of meat is $5 per pound, then the individual is able to demand 5 pounds of meat. So we put a point where those two numbers intersect. If the price is $4 a pound and the individual is able to demand 6 1/4 pounds of meat, we put a dot where those two numbers intersect. If the price per meat is $3 per pound and then the individual is able to demand 8 1/3 pounds of meat, and we'll put a dot where those two numbers intersect. Next, if the price is $2 per pound, then the individual is able to demand 12 1/2 pounds, and we'll put a dot where those two numbers intersect. And finally, if the price of meat is $1 per pound, then the individual is able to demand 25 pounds, and we'll put a dot where those two numbers intersect. Now, if we draw a line connecting all the points, a demand curve is formed. A demand curve is the graphical representation of a person's demand for a good. Notice as the curve slopes downward as price decreases. Once again, the economists refer to this relationship as an inverse or negative relationship. Each one of the dots on the demand curve represents the quantity demanded. So the point pointed to by the arrow is the quantity demanded. In this case, the quantity demanded is 8.33 pounds or 8 1/3 pounds. There's another example of a demand schedule for books. Once again, the amount of books demanded at a particular price is the quantity demanded. In this case, the quantity demanded is 20 books at $4. Here's another example of a demand curve. Notice, like the previous example with the meat, that the demand curve slopes downward as price decreases and the quantity demanded increases. Thus, it too has a negative or an inverse relationship. Perhaps the only difference is to note that this demand curve is a straight line. Even though it is a straight line, economists still refer to it as a curve. The key thing to remember is that whether the demand curve is a straight line or a real curve, the economic analysis will be pretty much the same all the time. Like the example with meat, each of the points in this line represents the quantity demanded. On the graph on the slide, the quantity demanded at the price of $3 is 30 books. A market demand schedule is really just the sum of all the demand schedules of the individuals willing and able to purchase a good. In this example, at $5, Joe is willing to able to purchase 10 books. At $5, Olga is willing and able to purchase 5 books. At $5, Colleen is willing and able to purchase 15 books. So the market demand for books is 10 books from Joe, 5 books from Olga, 15 books for Colleen, or a total of 30 books at $5. The process could be repeated for each of the different prices. The market demand for the books is the green line because it represents the sum of Joe's demand plus Olga's demand plus Colleen's demand curves. Finally, sometimes you'll see, particularly in microeconomic courses, a demand curve which is horizontal. The horizontal demand curve represents a situation where the individual or the market's demand for a good is not dependent on price. Notice that the price of the good does not vary, but individuals may demand different quantities of the good. In this video, we learned that the law of demand is the quantity of a well-defined good that people are willing and able to purchase during a given period of time that decreases as the price increases, everything else being constant. Demand is the amount of a good that individuals are willing to purchase at every possible price during a given period of time. You also learned in this video that the quantity demanded is the amount of good that an individual is willing and able to purchase at a particular price. A demand schedule is a table listing the prices and their associated quantities. A demand curve is a line representing the prices and quantities of a demand schedule. The market demand is the sum of individual demand schedules. The market demand curve is the sum of individual demand curves.